Alright, so now I'm going to go over chapter 20, which is talking about program design and techniques for anaerobic exercise training, so including aerobic endurance and exercises in an athlete's program. This is definitely going to be specific towards um, athletes that require intense aerobic endurance um, training. And so usually that's a lot of athletes, but say for example, a track athlete that runs a 100-meter um, event doesn't necessarily require this type of training. There's just going to be more plyometrics, power, speed, agility, things like that. So the basis of this chapter, some of the key variables in this chapter that's talked about is of course the type of exercise that you're training for, or I guess more specifically your goals in the sport that you're training for. Frequency, it's going to depend on the type of aerobic training we're going to be doing, which I'll talk about in a second. The intensity in this chapter goes over RPE, which is also known as ratings of perceived exertion, and metabolic equivalents, also known as METs. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about RPEs in this presentation. And then, of course, duration. So then there's also work to rest ratios. And so essentially, it's just like it sounds. It's the ratio of work to the ratio of rest, depending on the demands of the exercise or the type of training that you're doing. And then, of course, there's progression. So depending on the activity that you're doing, you want to progress just like any other type of training program that you do. So some of the key physiological components in this chapter are maximal oxygen uptake, also known as the VO2 max. And so this is the main determinant of the aerobic endurance capacity of an athlete. And then usually this is on a percentage base. And so essentially we can test this through different uses of equipment and whatnot. And so a lot of times, again, this is used for aerobic because aerobic meaning you're using oxygen. So you want to know an athlete's maximal oxygen intake. And then there's a lactate threshold, so that's usually what causes muscle fatigue, is a lactic acid. So it's understanding the intensity at which lactate begins to accumulate in the muscles and induces fatigue. And so essentially when you explore the lactic threshold or you push a lactic threshold, you're improving you're extending your lactic threshold, and so you can delay fatigue that way, or you can increase your endurance to overcome the fatigue. And then there's exercise economy, which is the energy cost of activity for better efficiency, which leads to improved performances. And so then also there are different types of intensity monitoring. So the main thing is heart rate. So there's resting heart rate, maximal heart rate reserve, and then percentage of maximal heart rate. And then of course again there's RPEs, and then also power measurements, which are usually used in cycling to quantify work output. And then the endurance training methods, there's going to be 5 of them that's discussed in this chapter. There's long slow distance. A lot of times in running, this is known as like a conversational pace. And so it's going to be a low intensity, long duration event. So you're enhancing your endurance base, and also you're using your fat storage. And then there's also pace and tempo training. So usually you do this slightly above the lactic threshold to improve your running economy, and then also to practice and tolerate your what they call race pace. So essentially that, especially when you're running or you're cycling and whatnot, it's your goal speed or your goal performance ability that you want to reach. So in order to get there, you have to consistently practice it. And then there's interval training. So essentially on and off, different intervals in which you're going on work and off work. And that's not necessarily off. It could be considered easy, so hard periods and easy periods. So essentially you're alternating between a high intensity and a low intensity period, or recovery period, to target and improve your VO2 max and aerobic capacity. And then there's HIIT, or high intensity interval training, and they are very brief but maximal effort burst. with recovery times to improve VO2 max and times at high intensities. And then the last one is fartlek training, and it's essentially a combination of multiple of these different types of endurance training methods, blending LSD, long slow distance, LSD also known as long slow distance, tempo, and interval training into one type of session. And so essentially in the chapter it talks about that this is a good training session or training method to use whenever you get a little bored of other types of training methods. And so to discuss what aerobic endurance performance is, aerobic endurance performance just refers to an athlete's ability to sustain prolonged high intensity exercise using their aerobic metabolism for their primary energy source. And it can depend on many physiological factors, such as explained earlier, VO2 max, lactate threshold, and exercise economy. And then some examples of some examples or sport examples in which this would be used for, because like I said, you wouldn't usually use this in a 100-yard dash or something similar that is short burst. You want something that's a long time. So an example would be cross country or long distance running. So you're going to want to improve their aerobic metabolism so that they can run for longer and run faster for longer. Cycling as well, long distance cycling, rowing, soccer where you have to keep running and running for a long period of time. Swimming, a triathlon is a really good example too. And so there's a lot of other examples. To focus more on triathlon, it has a lot of high demanding sports, so there's long distance swimming, cycling, and running. So it's important, it's a multi-sport aerobic endurance event. So not only do you have to focus your aerobic or train your aerobic metabolism on one sport, it's on multiple sports and doing them consecutively for a long period of time. And then to go over some of the key characteristics of aerobic endurance performance. This can include, some of the factors of aerobic endurance are, like I said, VO2 max. Um, so it's the rate at which an athlete's oxygen can be taken and then transported and used by the muscles. And a higher VO2 max allows an athlete to sustain greater work rates. And then to talk about the scenario with the 17-year-old cross-country runner. So with the information that we're given, the resting heart rate is 48 beats per minute and the VO2 max is 75 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And so if we're discussing all of the 5 different types of aerobic exercise, we'll start with long, slow distance. So with this one, you're going to want to be at a 70% VO2 max, and more specifically for this athlete, that's going to be 52.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And this is going to be this exercise or this type of training should be executed 1 to 2 times per week. The duration of a long slow distance exercise or training method is between 30 minutes to 2 hours or 120 minutes. So long distance, as mentioned before. And this is going to be an RPE 4. Like I mentioned before, this is commonly known as conversational pace. So you should be able to hold a conversation with somebody while executing this exercise. The second one is the pace/tempo training method. This should be executed 1 to 2 times per week at for about 20 to 30 minutes. And this is going to be at lactate threshold. So for lactate threshold, it's essentially going to be more so determined by the athlete and what they're feeling rather than going off of the VO2 max, a specific percentage number. So at lactate threshold, so they should feel fatigue in their muscles. It shouldn't be too easy for them, but it should be enough to where they can start to feel the fatigue within their muscles. And it should be about RPE 6 to 7. And then there's interval training. This should be executed about 1 to 2 times per week. The duration should be about 3 to 5 minutes with a work to rest ratio of 1 to 1. So an example of that would be 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off. So for this specific athlete, it could be, say for example, they do 3 minutes at like a 5 minute pace, and then 3 minutes at a 7 minute pace. So that would be a good example of interval. They're going on and off, on and off. The intensity is that it should be close to their VO2 max. And again, their VO2 max is 75 milliliters per kilogram per minute. The RPE is going to be 6 though, instead of something higher, like between the 8 to 10 range, because they have that off or more so resting period. So the periods in which they're going to be doing the work or going to be close to that's where they're going to be close to the VO2 max. And then the resting or slower periods are going to be about closer back to between 70 to 80% of the VO2 max. And then you have HIIT, high intensity interval training. This should only be executed once a week because it is a high intensity training method. The duration for this should be the actual execution of the exercise should be 30 to 90 seconds with a work to rest ratio of 1 to 5. So an example would be 2 to 4 minutes on doing an exercise, and then less than or equal to 2 minutes off. The intensity should be close to the VO2 max, so approximately 90%, and more specifically for this athlete, that's going to be at approximately 67.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute with an RPE of 8. So this is going to be very demanding, again, high intensity, and once again, why it should only be executed once a week. And then fartlek, once again, is also a very demanding training method and should only be executed once a week with a duration of 20 to 60 minutes, depending on what the activity is and what sport you're training for as well. So fartlek is easier to go 60 minutes for whenever you're doing, say, cycling or running, but it can be harder whenever you're doing, say, for example, swimming. So the intensity is going to be between the long slow distance training method and the pace/tempo training intensity. So it's going to be still an RPE 8 because it's a mix of a lot of different other training methods, and it's going to still be demanding, and it's going to be essentially demanding and over a long period of time. And again, you're combining all these training methods, the long slow distance and the pace/tempo training. And so it should be at about 70% of your VO, or for the easy portion of this. So for the long slow distance portion of this training, your VO2 should be at about 70% of the max. And specifically for this athlete, that's going to be 52.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And then for the short, fast bursts or hills or something similar, that's where it's going to be between 85 and 90% of the VO2 max, which is between 63.75 and 67.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And the work to rest ratio for this exercise is going to be 1 to 1 or 1 to 2. So an easy example would be 1 minute on, 1 minute off, or 1 minute on and 2 minutes off.